r/NoSleep, posted by Reddit user Spite Goddess. I run a museum of cursed objects. I'll tell you about the road sign. Things were hectic for a couple of days after the robbery. M was livid that, as she put it, I was almost killed. I tried to reason with her, explain that she'd seen, as well as I had, that I came nowhere near being shot. At most, the crazy lady just waved the gun around aimlessly. She did point it at me once or twice, but really, saying I was almost killed was a little dramatic. Anyway, we talked and M was furious, and I was placating, and we compromised, which means M demanded that I install a real security system, and so I'm going to do that now. Courtney's still doing great. She picks up on everything super fast, like, really weirdly fast. I feel like she must have some experience with this sort of thing, but when I've tried to probe gently into her past, she's laughed off my question or changed the subject. She hasn't really asked much of me though, so I'm trying to respect her privacy. Still, I can't deny it's a little weird. Then there's the fact that M really doesn't like Courtney. She's told me herself that she isn't really sure why. They got along fine at first, and then M went to touch Courtney on the shoulder, and Courtney flinched away like she was afraid M had the plague, and ever since then, M's been pretty suspicious of her. It doesn't help that the crow's still completely ignoring Courtney either. M has taken that as a sign that something sketchy is going on. I've taken it as a sign that the crow has determined he doesn't care about her either way. And before you ask, no, M really is not the jealous type, and I do respect her opinion and her instincts, so I'm keeping a close eye on Courtney. But sensitive or not, I can't really fire an excellent employee like Courtney based on M's gut feeling. So there's your update. Now, I've had lots of questions and I promise I will try to get to everything. People seem really interested in the road sign, so I'm going to talk about that. And I'm keen to talk about this too, because this case was how I met M. It was a blustery, nasty, miserable day. I'd finally gotten the stupid Nokia room set up, and Jan had promptly bumbled into the glass case and knocked the damn thing to the ground, forcing me to reset it up. Regardless, I far preferred the insidious curse that surrounded me with a foul dark miasma to the rain and the wind outside. This, as I recall it, was why I was so very displeased to receive a call on my mother's phone. It was actually someone I knew for once, rather than some million-year-old person who taught my mother's in grade school or something. It was an old classmate of mine, a man by the name of Dmitri. I was instantly nervous when I realized that he was the one calling. He'd always been something of a worrisome case, even back in kindergarten. He always seemed, to put it bluntly, sort of cursed. Now, listen, I do know how that sounds, coming from me. I've always been a believer in the fact that people aren't cursed, things are. Things are simple, hollow, devoid of soul. It's easy for something else, something more, to take over, to cling. But humans? Humans are complex. Our spiritual energy fluctuates moment to moment, going from a white dwarf to a supernova in seconds as our emotions twist, grow, and change. For the sort of nasty energy that makes up a curse, however determined it might be, that's a lot to survive. Sometimes, really depressed folks can carry sorts of semi-curses, but they only really live through the dull, nothing times and die out when they hit the extremely sad times. The thing is, though, Dmitri was unlucky. Like, crazy unlucky. We're talking unlucky by the standards of someone who was raised in a house full of curses. Dmitri and I met up for brunch. I've always hated the word brunch, but that was the least of my worries. "Lexi," he said the second we were sitting, shocking me with an old nickname I hadn't heard in a decade. "Thanks for coming." "Of course," I said distractedly, busy looking him up and down in dismay. Even before their deaths, Dmitri's parents had never held down jobs, but he was never this gaunt. His long brown hair, always giving him a cute puppy dog sort of look before fell all around his face like a greasy old curtains. The sharp shadows and angles of his hollow cheeks striking against his milk white skin. Where his video game branded t-shirts once hung comically around a slender frame, they are now dwarfed by his sunken body disturbingly. Have you been? I instantly knew this was the wrong thing to say, of course. His eyes darkened, and he hung his head, allowing his hair to cover his face for a moment while he recovered. I meant, I said. Then I didn't clarify. I admit that I had not yet developed my sense of unwavering professionalism back then. My girlfriend just died, he finally said. His words were as hollow as his body. So sorry, I said automatically. 6, he said. Sorry? 6. What do you mean, Dmitri? My 6th girlfriend, who died. She was my 6th. Obviously, my immediate thought was, if you're clearly somehow causing the deaths of your girlfriends, wouldn't it be kind of you to stop dating? But I stopped, took a deep breath, and reminded myself that victims of curses are just as desperate to feel love as anyone else, maybe more desperate, and that many of the curse victims will actually over-involve themselves in things that tend to be harmful, as a way to try to prove that nothing abnormal is happening. It doesn't work, of course, but psychologically speaking, there's a basis for it. Can you tell me more about what's happening? I asked instead, as gently as I could. He nodded, then bit his bottom lip, which was so thin I was afraid his front incisors were going to slice right through it. I'm waiting for Emily. Excuse me? I said sharply. Believe it or not, this would not be the first time a curse victim had set me up to wait for the arrival of some screwed up ball of energy that wished me ill. She's a psychic, said Dmitri, and God, that was so much worse. You see, at the time, I didn't have an overwhelmingly positive view of psychics, mostly because most of them aren't psychic. Don't get me wrong, being a commercial psychic takes skill, and a lot of it. It just has nothing to do with actually being sensitive. It's all people reading. Watch the person's face, not their cards. Read their eyes, not their fortune. You'd be amazed how much a trained professional can tell about what you're thinking from the slightest shift of your body. A blink that's just a little too fast. A tongue that darts out to wet lips that are parted just a little too wide. I have the interpersonal skills of a slightly undersized horseradish, so I could never do it. It's impressive in its own way. Still, being able to interpret emotions and thoughts based on body language is not in the least helpful against actual curses. And the last thing I needed with something that had killed 6 girlfriends already was an annoying extra to protect. Keeping Dmitri alive was going to be hard, by the looks of it. Incorrectly interpreting my disgusted grimace, Dmitri hurried to say, "Don't worry, it's not some random or dangerous. She bumped into me in the store last week and nearly passed out and warned me to be careful of signs. Only, I don't know what kind of signs. Like, aren't there all sorts of signs of trouble? Omens? Anyway, I got into contact with her after I found her on Facebook, and she said she'd come and take a look, but warned me that she probably wasn't going to be able to do much about it, since that wasn't her area of expertise." "This is a person who threatened you in a Walmart or something?" I questioned skeptically. "And you just decided to involve her in this? You have no idea who she actually is?" "She wasn't threatening me," snapped Dmitri, a little life returning to that awful parlor for the first time that day. "Maybe she's a psychic and maybe she's not, but at least she's someone who genuinely concerned for me." The fire in him died abruptly, and then he was just tired again, and somehow that felt way worse than when he was mad at me. I can't say that about a lot of people. Not anymore. "Fine. I'll work with her," I grouched. "But I'll have you know that my mother's never worked with psychics. Didn't they? Dmitri and I both turned to face the newcomer. She was gorgeous, voluminous curly hair cascading down her shoulders, and a framing stern face with serious dark eyes. I forgot entirely to detest her until she opened her mouth and said, "You must be Alexis." "You must be the fraud," I retorted, although she hadn't said anything rude to me. Yes, I know. I'm not proud of it. Like I said, there was a lot I didn't know. She ignored my unkind tone and took a seat, looking to Dmitri expectantly. I straightened up, evaluating her curiosity. Most psychics I knew couldn't wait to run their mouths. The only way they could trick their customers was to keep a steady flow of bullshit of some sort, so that most of the poignant stuff would stick, while the off-base statements would be forgotten. This one seemed serious, quiet. It unnerved and intrigued me. "Okay," said Dmitri, glancing nervously between us as though expecting me to deck Emily, which, in all fairness, I rather felt like doing. "It all started when my family moved here in the 2nd grade. I remember. Our teacher's name was Miss Love. Dmitri had been the new kid in class. His very first day, he'd stood up on top of his chair and proudly announced that his family had just moved and that he loved basketball. He was so different then. That's when my bad luck started," he said gloomily. "Within the first week, my dad lost his job, and then my mom did the month after. They both had these random accidents at work and no one could explain. And then they got blamed. Then every time they tried to interview for a new job, something horrible would happen. One time my dad accidentally killed a receptionist's cat when it ate his shoelace as he waited for an interview. The cat wasn't even supposed to be there. No matter how careful they were, my mom kept getting pregnant. Each time, after about 8 months, she'd miscarry. It was horrible. Then, one day, she was on her way to the doctor's appointment and her car spun out for seemingly no reason and she died. I was 12. I'd heard that particular story before. It was hot gossip around school, which was depressing enough. Then, when I was 13, my dad's bus drove off a pier and everyone in it died. My aunt and uncle moved to my home to help me out, but they were dead within the year. It was the same for everyone that came to care for me after that. Finally, when I was 16, all my living relatives were dead. I was supposed to be sent to this super distant stepdad or something, but I filed for emancipation." He sighed. "I was tired of hurting people. I'm so sorry for your loss," said Emily. "That must have been incredibly difficult." "It was," Dmitri admitted. "I always figured my family was cursed or something, but eventually it became clear it was just me. I would get into accidents. I was always sporting painful injuries. I was deathly sick every single test day, and the day of every makeup test. I couldn't graduate high school. I couldn't hold down a job. Couldn't keep a car in working order. I could barely grocery shop without something awful happening. But I couldn't die." He laughed bitterly. "Not that I didn't try. I was too unlucky to even do that." I know I must have been wearing an obvious grimace. I was never good with tragedy, and Dmitri's whole life had been one big tragedy. It was even worse than I thought. Luckily for me, Emily had placed her hand on Dmitri's and was gazing steadily at him. He clung to her like a lifeline, clutching her hand so hard, I'm sure it must have hurt. She didn't flinch, didn't give any indication that she felt it at all. My respect for her grew. She cleared her throat. "Dmitri, I understand that you've been through a lot, and I'd like to try to help if I'm able. Would it be possible for us to see your home?" The tour of Dmitri's house was sad, but mostly uneventful. It definitely gave me the creeps. There was so much negative energy attached to Dmitri that even I could feel it. He seemed to agree by the way she went a shade paler upon stepping into the living space. We walked around, asked some more questions, and then decided to bid him goodnight. Emily had walked to the meeting point and had ridden over with Dmitri to his house. When I offered her a ride, she accepted somewhat cautiously. We drove in silence for several minutes, Emily's breathing even out somewhat the further we got away from Dmitri. After a while, Emily spoke. "I understand that you don't like me, Alexis, and I understand why. I'm just hoping that you'll be willing to put this aside long enough to work with me. Whatever this is doesn't feel good, and I can't do it on my own. I feel things, analyze things. I can't do what you do." I stopped for a moment, evaluating her. I was impressed by the frank, straightforward nature of her words. I respected it. "All right, what do you want to do?" "Whatever this curse is, it feels resentful," commented Emily, her eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. I looked away, back at the road, my skin crawling. "Aren't they all?" I grumbled. Emily's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Haven't you ever run across a curse fueled by energy that's tragically sad? Or just confused and helpless?" My cheeks burned, and my fingers whitened around the steering wheel. "Listen, psychic, I don't feel shit. I go and find that stuff that's hurting people, I figure out how to stop it, and I display it, and make money off of it. That's it." What I didn't add was that, embarrassingly enough, I hadn't really thought about the curses being anything but cruel, vicious energy before. Maybe I would have, if not for the object, and my mother's. But at that time, I truly hated them, and everything about them, unequivocally. Emily nodded to acknowledge my words as I struggled to regain my composure. She didn't seem judgmental, just thoughtful. "I do think the curse that's plaguing Dmitri happens to be pretty malevolent, although I'm not sure why, and there's something odd about it. I can't put my finger on it." "That's helpful," I muttered, then immediately followed it up with a muttered apology at Emily's disapproving look. "Do you think the curse is attached to something in his house? If you can figure out what it is, I can take it away from him and test it." Emily shook her head slowly. Her hair bounced a little, and I found myself watching it, entranced. "The most cursed thing in that house is Dmitri himself." "You mean Dmitri is actually cursed?" I questioned disbelievingly. "People don't really get cursed," denied Emily. "Which, yeah, that. Plus, I don't feel like it's coming directly from him. More like something in him. I don't know. I haven't felt anything like it before." I tried not to dwell on how very unhelpful that was, and instead remarked, "Well, hopefully he hasn't got a cursed cap in his tooth or something, because that's going to be incredibly inconvenient." Said Emily, and I stopped talking before I could give her any more ideas. We met Dmitri again the next day. He looked, if possible, even more miserable than before. "I'm just going to live to be 112, alone and injured and sad the entire time," he whined, while Emily very conspicuously checked his teeth for caps. "You know what, Dmitri? Let's do something relaxing," she announced after releasing him. I stared at her, eyes narrowed, wondering if I was about to see some typical psychic bull. "It's clear this is really stressing you out. Is there anywhere we can go where you'll feel a little more calm? Maybe somewhere you go a lot?" Her dark eyes met mine significantly, and I understood. Emily couldn't find the source of the curse here. She was wondering if he'd picked it up somewhere else. It must have been somewhere he frequented to affect him this strongly. "Well, there's a path through a nearby woods I always took to get to school since I moved here," he responded glumly. "I've been walking there even after I finished school to get some fresh air and take some time to think." "Sounds perfect," smiled Emily gently, letting the sound suspicious part go unspoken. We followed Dmitri outside. It was a lovely afternoon. Birds were chirping and bugs were buzzing. I hate bugs, but still, it's a nice background ambience. The path was winding and long, and the dirt felt good under my feet, firm but with just a little give, enough to give me a good foothold. Feeling well grounded always helped me when I felt stressed or anxious, and I was feeling both. The thing about me is that although my family has always been involved with curses, it's not like we're protected against them. And like I said, I'm not sensitive like M. The result is that I frequently walk my stupid ass directly into a curse without even realizing it, like some sort of bumbling idiot. I've always gotten lucky, which is why I'm still here. Like with the Nokia cell phone, which gave me a lot of money instead of, killing me. But this curse, Dmitri's curse, I can't see anything good about it. If I walk face first into it, depending on its unique rules, I just might be screwed. I wondered, given the strength of the curse, if it could even kill something indestructible like Jan or something weird like Herman. As we walked, I began to feel a bit queasy, the way I do when there's something nasty around. I noticed Emily was getting paler too, and had begun to stumble every few steps. Rather than making a show of it, though, she sat her jaw sternly and trudged on stubbornly. It was becoming rather hard to despise her, especially since I was beginning to suspect she might actually be sensitive. I noticed an old road sign up ahead. It was right next to the dirt path. Looking closely, I could see a grass-covered old road, probably unused for several decades at least, running alongside it. It was yellow and diamond-shaped, and was covered in grime, so that the wording had barely been legible. Luckily, my eyesight hadn't yet been cursed, so I was able to read it as we approached. It read, "Beware, blank, ahead." Whatever was actually ahead was unclear, since the word in the middle had been scratched beyond any comprehension, and remained only as a marred blob of white marks. I felt a chill run up my spine, instinctively aware that nothing looked like this was ever good news. I stepped towards it, walking slightly ahead of my companions. I admit I was curious. A couple of steps away, I noticed that all sounds of bugs and birds had ceased, leaving only the sound of my own breathing and footsteps of Emily and Dmitri behind me. That thought gave me a pause. I stopped briefly. Behind me, Dmitri coughed suddenly, then wheezed. "Sorry, exercise asthma." The sound spurred me back into action, and I took another step towards the sign. "Alexis, don't breathe." I had barely registered Emily's words when she tackled me from the side. Her slight body was surprisingly powerful when she launched at high speed, and both of us sprawled to the ground. I heard an unpleasant crack as we hit, and my mind went blank, expecting pain, but it never came. A moment later, Emily had risen to her feet and yanked me up, pulling me away from the sign, back to where Dmitri stood in obvious shock, his mouth gaping open. As I stumbled to a halt beside him, my brain caught up to the current events, and I whirled on Emily. "What the hell, Emily? You could have seriously hurt me. What the hell is your problem? I don't care for psychics, and you tackle me?" Emily, quite calm, and not at all out of breath, evenly responded, "I know what the curse is." As it turned out, Emily hadn't been able to figure out the curse because it had been living inside Dmitri's lungs. It inhabited the signpost, and reached its tendrils of energy through the air to find new victims. When a victim breathes in the curse, it curls within their lungs, latches to their alveoli, like some kind of virus, and lives there, spreading evil will and bad luck until the victim inevitably dies, years later, after losing everything dear to them. Emily explained over a cup of coffee that there wasn't any way to remove the curse from poor Dmitri, but that she would appreciate if I could take the road sign to stop any other unwitting passerby from getting cursed. We did give Dmitri some salt and sage, which Emily claimed to help dissipate some of the curse-related ill luck, although the curse would likely be attached to him forever. It seemed that repeated exposure or more inhalation of the air allowed more to live there, which caused more bad luck to manifest until deaths began. This also meant that having it in a museum was fairly safe. Even if people disobeyed the rules and breathed around the sign, unless they were frequent visitors or spectacularly unlucky, they should experience only milder effects. They might be without a job, but they shouldn't immediately lose their loved ones. I thanked her for her help with the case and promised to do my best to keep the road sign safe. She nodded, still pensive, I figured she must always be that way. She offered to pay, and as I was still short on bills from getting the museum up and running at the time, I gratefully accepted. She pulled her right hand from her pocket for the first time that morning to grab her wallet. I gasped despite myself. Her hand was thoroughly bandaged all the way to the wrist. Emily, what? I didn't finish my question. I remember the sounding crack I'd heard when she'd pushed me. When she'd saved me, that was. I'm so sorry, I said numbly, staring at her hand. You saved me and I sucked. Can you forgive me? Well, everyone can be a little judgmental about things they don't know. Emily smiled. Her smile was absolutely lovely, serious yet sunny. It made me warm inside. I forgive you. We stood and shook hands, her left, of course. And please, she said, still smiling, call me Em. The sign now stands proudly in the Hall of the Cursed, surrounded on all sides by official museum rules that read, "Do not inhale within 1 foot radius of the road sign." Tape outlines this radius on the floor so that it's clearly visible. Only a couple of idiots have broken the rule, and out of those, only one got into a major car accident a couple of minutes after leaving. I've got to go. Em's calling me to bed, and now that Courtney's taking the night shifts, I can actually spend some time with her. Until next time, if you ever hear the birds and the bugs stop making sound, something's probably wrong. And remember, do not inhale near the road sign.